Hello and welcome to your neck, spine, and shoulder mobility workshop. I'm fitness instructor Jessica Tetlaw from Petawawa. On our agenda today, we're going to cover the anatomy of the neck and spine, just some basic info so that the rest of everything that I say makes sense. We'll cover the movement patterns, some common myths and misinformation, daily maintenance, so what's in your toolbox to help take care of your spine on a regular basis. And then if you're interested in learning more, I'm going to give you some recommended reading. We're also going to be covering anatomy of the shoulder joint, the movement patterns, and the daily maintenance of that joint as well. So here we go, anatomy of the neck and spine. So on this slide, you can see that the spine is made up of three segments. You've got the cervical spine, your neck, the thoracic spine, and the lumbar spine. If you look at the graphic there, you can see which ones are which. They're all color coordinated, and you may notice that the spine does have natural curves. You can see how the vertebrae fit together, the disc that's in between, and how the shape of the vertebrae change based on where they are in the spine. So the cervical vertebrae are a little bit smaller, the lumbar vertebrae are larger, so you can see just the differences there. These differences in shape and structure do affect the way that we expect each part of the spine to move. In a moment, I'm going to go deeper into the roles of each segment of the spine as well as the movement capabilities of each. But here you can see that we do expect to see some differences just based on the overall structure. Here we have the roles of the cervical spine. So first and foremost, protect the spinal cord. I think you could say that that's a fairly important job. It's also responsible for supporting the head and its movement and facilitates blood flow to the head. Its movement capabilities are flexion, extension, rotation, and lateral flexion. And these movements can be performed in combination. In the video that follows, I'm going to show you a demonstration of what all of these movements look like in the cervical spine. First up, we have flexion. So I'm showing you 2 reps of each one. Flexion brings your chin to your chest. Next is extension, so being able to lift your chin up towards the ceiling. Lateral flexion would be taking your ear down towards your shoulder. You can do this in more of a diagonal movement as well. And then rotation is your ability to turn your head from side to side. So when you're shoulder checking, when you're driving, rotation is that very important movement that we need to complete that action. Roles of the thoracic spine. So again, protect the spinal cord. The thoracic spine also anchors your rib cage to your spine, and it's built more for stability than mobility, which is why you'll notice in the movement capabilities, it's really only meant for large movements of rotation, whereas for like flexion, extension, lateral flexion, it's a little bit more limited in that range of motion. So it's less mobile than your cervical and lumbar spine, but even within the thoracic spine, the range of motion varies. Gradually, as we move down towards the lumbar spine, it becomes more mobile. And again, in the following video, I'm going to show you what all of these movements look like in your thoracic spine. So for movements, first up we have rotation. I'm in this half kneeling position so you can see that my hips aren't moving. This is all coming from my thoracic spine. So it's that true rotation that this segment of the spine is really built to do. Now I've got my chin tucked and my arms crossed so you can see the flexion in that spine. Again, not a lot of movement. It's very limited here. You'll see extension as well is quite awkward. There's not a lot of movement there. And then next up is lateral flexion, so the shoulder is coming down to the side or back to the heel. A little bit more movement in that range of motion. But if you can see there, most of the movement is coming from the lower part of the thoracic spine. The roles of the lumbar spine are quite numerous. So you might have noticed that the lumbar vertebrae were much larger than the thoracic or the cervical vertebrae, and that's because one of their main jobs is to support and stabilize the upper body. It's also facilitating the movements of the trunk while also protecting the spinal cord and nerves. It still has that very, very important job. And it's also responsible for controlling the leg movements. So quite the list of responsibilities there. You'll be able to see the movement capabilities, the flexion, extension, and lateral flexion, and flexion of the lumbar spine when you're rounding your lower back. That's usually when you have your fitness instructor coming up to you in class and reminding you to lift with neutral spine, and you'll be able to see what that looks like from our perspective. First up is flexion, so you can see that rounding of my low back. That is what fitness instructors are seeing when we're trying to get you to deadlift, and we want to make sure that you have neutral spine. Lateral flexion coming from the low back. And last but not least, we'll move into extension. So trying to extend back, there's not a ton of movement there, but a little bit more than the thoracic spine. Essentially, what I'm trying to get across here is that your spine is designed to move. It's not just a stiff, solid object. It's meant to have moving parts and create different movement patterns. Okay, common myths. This is probably my second favorite part of this workshop. I love myth busting, so we're going to explore 5 common myths around back pain. And the answers and the facts of these myths are coming to you mainly from Dr. Stu McGill's research. And he's Canadian, and he is one of the leading researchers in low back pain. Okay, so like I said, 5 common back pain myths. There are many, many, many more myths that we could bust, but for the sake of time, I've chosen the 5 that I believe to be the most pervasive. So the first one, I think we have all probably heard this one at some point or another, and that is that back pain is linked to tight hamstrings. Most research has found that in many cases, it's not that tight hamstrings cause low back pain, but rather that they're related to back issues. So chances are, if you have low back pain, you also have tight hamstrings. But our hammies often decrease in tightness as our back pain subsides. The only caveat is that when one hamstring tends to be tighter than the other, that asymmetry has mild influences on back pain, especially in athletes. But learning how to move properly will have a greater impact on your back pain than stretching your hamstrings. Myth number 2 is that lying in bed is good for back pain. So definitely a myth. Lying in bed for excessive periods can actually cause back pain. Lying down and complete rest are almost never the answer. And if that is the one piece of information that you take away from this workshop, I will be happy. It's a little known fact that you are actually at your tallest first thing in the morning. And that's because those discs that you saw between each vertebrae are packed with very concentrated proteins that just love water. When we're lying down horizontally, these discs fill with fluid and gently push the vertebrae away from each other, somewhat lengthening the spine. And the reason our backs are often stiff in the morning is because these discs are so full of fluid. Think water balloons ready to burst. That when we get up and our spines return to vertical, this excess fluid begins to seep out, and then after 1 or 2 hours, we return to our normal height. And this natural ebb and flow is healthy and normal, and the problems only arise when your spine remains horizontal for too long. About 8 hours in bed is healthy, which goes along with your sleep research, but much longer than that is not, as it allows your spine to continue to swell and to exacerbate disc pain. So limiting time in bed is actually good for your back pain. Number 3, and I hear this one so often, and that is that yoga and Pilates are great ways to alleviate back pain. Often the go-to recommendation is yoga and Pilates because of their therapeutic properties, but Dr. McGill's studies have not supported these claims and have actually indicated the opposite. So some poses and movements from yoga and Pilates may be beneficial or feel good at the time, but there are components of both systems that may actually aggravate an individual with back conditions. And there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all exercise regimen, which I know you guys know. And one of Dr. McGill's main issues with Pilates is this notion that you should flatten your lower back to the floor when you're lying down. He is vehemently against this idea of straightening one of the natural curves of the spine, as it disrupts that neutral position that we saw at the beginning of the workshop and can actually stimulate the mechanism of injury for many people. It's possible that some individuals feel a fleeting sense of relief in this position, as it does stimulate the stretch receptors in your back, but in reality, the symptoms usually return with a vengeance. The bottom line is that if specific components of these symptoms are chosen and modified for the individual, they can help, but neither program is a blanket cure for all individuals. It's a better idea to go see your local PSP fitness instructor or reconditioning department and ask them for some help. Myth number 4 is that stretching is good for reducing back pain. Although stretching is considered universally beneficial, this is a fairly old-fashioned idea that needs to be challenged. There is no such thing as a stretch that is good for all patients. Each case is different, and each stretch must be chosen carefully and tailored to the individual. For example, a very common stretch is pulling your knees to your chest or something similar along those lines, which triggers the stretch reflex. That's a neurological phenomenon that reduces pain sensitivity. When you do this, it provides about 15 to 20 minutes of pain relief, but that means that it's just a short-term fix. The problem with this position is that you're potentially aggravating the discs between your vertebrae and that the pain will return after temporary relief. So it's this vicious cycle. You do the stretch, you feel better for about 20 minutes, and then you're in pain again. So you do the stretch and you feel better, but then you're in pain again and again and again and again. So instead of focusing your energy on stretches, you should try and begin by stabilizing and controlling the spine. When you're right at the beginning, try modifying your daily movements to maintain a neutral spine as much as possible. Last but not least, we have myth number 5, and that is that bodybuilding exercises will help with back rehab. So bulking up is not necessarily the answer to finding that pain-free function that most people are after. Isolation exercises, which are popular in bodybuilding, are generally only targeting a single muscle at a time and also often include the use of machines. The goals of bodybuilding are generally not in line with enhancing the control of one's movement capabilities and thus are not helpful in reaching that goal of pain-free function. Okay, here it is. My favorite part of the workshop. We're talking about your daily maintenance toolbox. So these are all tools that you can pull out and implement on a daily basis to help maintain your spine. I'll go through each exercise in detail and give you a little bit more information as to why each one is included. Welcome to your daily maintenance toolbox. These are 3 things that you can work into your schedule that will help not just maintain your spine mobility, but help to improve it over time. And with that comes decreased stiffness, a little bit more comfort, and better movement through your spine. So we've got posture, level 1 CARS, and the McGill Big 3. Just a quick note on posture. The best posture is your next one. You don't want to be spending too much time in the same position, so we already know that we're not supposed to spend hours and hours sitting down. It's all about getting up, moving around, maintaining that consistent movement throughout the day. So that's just more awareness of not just one rigid idea of posture, but moving through and experiencing different postures throughout the day. Level 1 CARS, these are a component of functional range conditioning. They're your base level, basic maintenance, just designed to kind of pump some fluids into your joints and squeeze some waste products out of there. So it helps just kind of feel a little bit more loose when you're doing them on a daily basis. The idea is these are level 1 because it's just your own body participating in the movement. You're not adding any extra resistance or anything like that. So it's just active blocking. So you yourself are trying to control the movement through the whole range of motion. So we'll start with the neck CARS. CARS stands for Controlled Articular Rotations, articular meaning joint. Essentially, they're joint circles, but with intention and with effort put into them. So you're going to find yourself in a nice strong standing position. Brace your core. You're going to screw your feet into the ground, pull your shoulders down and back, and even make some fists with your hands. What we're trying to do is we're trying to scrape out every last bit of range of motion. So earlier you saw all the different ways that your neck is designed to move, and now we're going to explore each of those with a little bit of extra effort. So you're going to pull your chin down towards your chest, 1 vertebrae at a time, trying only to move from the neck. We'll rotate our chin over to our right shoulder. Then we're laterally flexing, taking the right ear back towards the right heel, extending, taking the neck all the way back. Lateral flexion on the other side, taking the left ear to the left heel. You rotate, bringing the chin down towards the left shoulder and back to where we started. We're going to repeat that circle 1 more time. So chin to the right shoulder, laterally flexing the ear to the heel, extending the neck back, lateral flexion, left ear to left heel, chin to left shoulder, rotate down to start. And now we're going to reverse that. So rotate the chin to the left shoulder, lateral flexion back, extending the head to look up at the ceiling, right ear to right heel, chin down towards the shoulder, and back to where we started, where we repeat that circle 1 more time. Rotating left, lateral flexion, extending the neck back, right ear to right heel, chin down to the shoulder and down to the chest, and then we release back up 1 vertebrae at a time. So the idea is you're doing that at least 2 in each direction, at least once a day. If it feels good and you really like it, you can do it multiple times a day. Otherwise, at least that once in the morning when you wake up. If you feel any pinching when the angle is closing, so the angle that's getting smaller when you're moving, back off about 10 to 15 degrees until you don't feel that pain anymore. If you find that the pain goes away after doing that for a few weeks, then excellent. If it doesn't, then that means it's time to go get yourself checked out. Moving on to our T-spine car, so we're remembering that that's our thoracic spine, that's that mid-back. Limited movement in most capacities, but we're just trying to maximize it as much as possible. So we start by crossing the hands over the chest and tucking the chin down to the chest. So we're taking the cervical spine out of it. We're rooting the legs nice and strong into the floor because we don't want that lumbar spine to move. And then one vertebrae by one, we're trying to flex forward, not letting the hips tuck under until we get all the flexion out. We're going to rotate so that the elbows look down over the right foot. We're flexing laterally, bending out to the side, right shoulder to right heel, extending back as much as possible, still keeping that chin tucked. Lateral flexion out to the side, left shoulder to left heel. Rotating down towards that left foot and rotating back to where we started. And again, we're repeating that. So rotate over to the right foot. Lateral flexion, right shoulder to right heel. Extending back, keeping that chin tucked. Left shoulder to left heel. Elbows over that left foot and back to start, maintaining that flexion. And just like the neck, we're going to go back the opposite way, so rotating over the left foot, doing your best not to let those hips get involved at all. They're staying exactly where they are. We're coming around right shoulder to right heel, elbows over the right foot, back down to start. And one more time, all the way around. The idea is you're moving as slowly and as smoothly as you can. We're trying to exert as much control over the range of motion as possible, because by building this strength and asking for that range of motion from our brain, we're more likely to increase it as we practice this consistently. Next, I've added hips to this list because a lot of the time tight and weak hips can manifest itself as discomfort in our low back region. So we want to keep those hips nice and loose. Everyone's always talking about their hip flexors being tight and their glutes not being strong enough. So this is kind of step one to achieving those goals of stronger glutes, looser hip flexors, and general overall better feeling hip joints. So you're going to need some balance for this one. You can drive one hand into the wall. The opposite hand is going to be out in front of you. Root that stabilizing leg into the ground. Right now it's going to be my right leg. I'm going to pull my left knee up as high as I can without letting my hips tuck under. Try and keep it up, up, up as high as possible. Open it up to the side. We're going to rotate down. Bring it all the way back and to where we started. One more circle. Lift that knee up, out to the side, rotate down, and back to where we started. Just reversing that, so push that hip back as much as possible, rotating out to the side and bringing it to the front. One more time, all the way around. Good. I'll show you that one only on one side because you get the idea. And then, last but not least, we've got the cat-cow. So we're not talking your usual cat-cow where you're just kind of trying to hinge in the middle. We're talking full spinal involvement. Core is involved, glutes are involved. We'll start just on our hands and knees. If you can, keep your toes tucked as much as possible. Wrists are below the shoulders and knees are below the hips. So you're in this strong, stable, kind of neutral tabletop position. And what we're going to do is we're trying to waterfall the movement up our spine. So it's not just hinging in the middle, We're going to start by tucking our pelvis, trying to lift one lumbar vertebrae at a time, and then the next one and the next, until the movement is just flowing up our spine, ending with tucking the chin. We're squeezing the glutes and the core. We reverse that movement, lift the tailbone, dropping one lumbar vertebrae at a time, flowing up into your thoracic, and ending with lifting the forehead. I'll show that one more time. So we'll tuck the pelvis, lifting one vertebrae at a time up towards the ceiling, and then squeezing through the glutes and the core, reversing that movement, trying to move every single vertebrae individually. It is quite challenging, so don't worry if you can't get it the very first time. With practice, it does become easier. So those are all your level 1 CARs. Again, level 1 because it's just active blocking. You yourself are trying to consciously only use the one joint that we're targeting in that moment. So when you're working on your neck, only your neck is moving. When you're working on your hips, only your hips are moving. That's the idea. We're looking for joint independence to foster better joint interdependence for things like squatting, running, playing sports, all those things that we love to do. The last one is not mandatory for everyone. So if you find that you have really severe back pain, you're just having a lot of issues with it, this is more for you if you're more symptomatic, because they just kind of help build that healthy core and back from scratch. So if you're already advanced, you're not really in a lot of pain, you're just more stiff, then you want to stay with 1 and 2. If you're having a bit more pain with your back, you might want number 3 as well. So McGill Big 3, the bird dog, is again on our hands and knees. That nice, strong, stable position. You're going to start just by extending the leg and raising the arm. You're going to hold that position for 10 seconds. Then you'll come back, reset, and another rep on the same side. As you get more advanced, you can sweep the floor, which just increases the core activation, or you can start to draw a box. Our second exercise on there is the McGill curl up. So that's from your back. This is a nice alternative to sit-ups, which spend a lot of time flexing the spine. So you're lying on your back. One leg is straight, one is bent. That's just to help keep the pelvis position more neutral. Hands are going to go in your low back. And if you find that you have discomfort with your neck in this position, you can just touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth. Lift the elbows up, and then like there's a string from your nose to the ceiling, pull up just very slightly, getting the shoulders off the ground. You'll hold this position for 10 seconds, and then you'll lower back down. So you should feel an increase in activation all along the front of your core. And then last but not least is our side bridge exercise. So you start lying on one side with the knees bent. The hips are going to be behind the knees, and you're resting on your forearm. So the elbow is directly below the shoulder. Knees are in front of hips. Elbow is in front of hips, so you're in more of a V-shaped setup. Opposite hand can hold onto the opposite shoulder if you find that you have a little bit of discomfort during this. You're going to squeeze the glutes and push the hips forward as much as possible. Big, strong glute activation. Hold this position for 10 seconds and then sit the hips back and down. So that was your daily maintenance toolbox. We're going to do just a quick recap just to make sure that you got all the details. So posture, your best posture is your next one. You want to make sure that you're not spending too much time in any one position throughout the day. So you're not lying down for too long, sitting for too long, standing for too long, trying to shift position as much as possible. You've got your level 1 CARs, your controlled articular rotations. They shouldn't be super strenuous, but they should be challenging. You're trying to keep your whole body braced while moving one joint at a time and trying to scrape out as much range of motion as possible. The idea isn't that this is easy and you just kind of flow through it without any effort. This is something that can be quite challenging when you put effort into it. You have the McGill Big 3. So essentially, if you're dealing with back pain, you're right at the beginning, these are good exercises to get you on your way to feeling better. All of the exercises mentioned here can be progressed. So don't think that you're just already too good for all of these exercises. All of these can be progressed. They can all be made more challenging if you're not at that beginner stage. And I just want to encourage you to go and talk to your local PSP because they are more than capable of helping you with these exercises. So ask them lots of questions, get them to check out your form if that's something that's possible in your area, because they have a lot of valuable information to share with you. And if you happen to be in Petawawa, you can definitely get in touch with me regarding any of this information. I just want to touch on the CARs one more time. So one of the main benefits of these movements is that not only is it maintaining your joint range of motion, but it's actually increasing it. And it becomes almost an anti-inflammatory movement because by contracting all of the muscles around your joint, you're squeezing in those fluids and nutrients that your joints need to be healthy, while also squeezing out waste products and things that can make you feel a little bit yucky in your joints. And by activating all the way around the joint, you're activating every movement pattern, you're kind of reminding your brain that, hey, I need to move my joint this way. So I need you to keep giving me access to this range of motion because unfortunately, when it comes to joints, if you don't use it, you lose it. So make sure that you're using it every day. If you are familiar with yoga and Pilates, you may know that cat-cow is a yoga pose. And so you may be thinking to yourself, but Jessica, you just said that yoga and Pilates aren't the answer to back pain. But I also mentioned that certain poses, certain movements can be beneficial. So just because these exercises are on this list, it doesn't mean that these are necessarily right for you. Like I said, there's no one-size-fits-all exercise program that I can give to everyone and they'll automatically feel better. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error, and again, talk to your local PSP because they can help you through any challenges that may arise. Here is a sample morning routine for you. So you would do 2 times per direction and per side if applicable for your CARs. And then for your McGill Big 3, you have 3 sets of varying reps. So it's a decreasing rep system. You're going to hold each rep for 10 seconds and then rest about 30 seconds in between. In order to progress these exercises, with the CARs, you can start by doing more reps at a time. So from 2, increase to 3 or 4, or you can start doing them more often throughout the day. So instead of just 2 per direction in the morning, you could try adding them also at noon or before you go to bed. You can set yourself quantity challenges where each rep still needs to be perfect, but you're trying to get in as many repetitions as you can throughout the day. For the McGill Big 3, start by increasing by 1 rep per set and see how you move on with that. Promised, here are some reading recommendations for you if you're interested in learning a bit more. First up, we have Back Mechanic, The Secrets to a Healthy Spine Your Doctor Isn't Telling You, as well as Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance, both by Dr. Stu McGill, both, in my opinion, invaluable resources. Back Mechanic is a little bit more friendly to people who aren't familiar with all the fitness jargon, And it gives you that step-by-step process of essentially how to rebuild your back. You can also check out backfitpro.com, which is Dr. Stu McGill's website, as well as functional anatomy seminars. That will give you a little bit more information about functional range conditioning and the CARs that I taught you earlier in the workshop. Moving on to the anatomy of the shoulder. So the shoulder is a ball and socket joint made up by the glenoid fossa and the humerus. So that's the glenohumeral joint. You can see that in the second illustration. It's also made up of the scapula and your rotator cuff muscles, and I think most of you have probably heard of your traps, lats, and delts. All of these you can see in the illustrations to the side. They all play a big role in the role of the shoulder as well as the movement capabilities that it has access to. Because it is a ball and socket joint, it's quite different than what we saw from the spine. The main role of the shoulder is to attach the arm to the torso. It also plays a big role in a lot of the activities we enjoy, throwing for sports, pushing and pulling when we're lifting, all of those kinds of things. It is one of the most mobile joints in the human body, but it sacrifices stability for that mobility. So this is why it's so susceptible to injury. The movement capabilities, as you'll see in the video that follows, are pretty much endless. Flexion, extension, abduction and adduction, internal and external rotation, circumduction, which is essentially a combination of all of those exercises. And then as well, you have the movements of the scapula, which would be elevation and depression, protraction and retraction. So the opportunities are essentially endless, which is why we can do complex movements like throwing. So here I'm demonstrating flexion and extension. Flexion is as my arm moves forward, and extension is as it moves backward. Abduction is moving the arm away from the body, and adduction is moving it back towards the body. Circumduction is just a combination of most of those movement patterns, and then internal and external rotation at the shoulder. Moving now into the movements of the shoulder blades. Elevation is lifting the shoulders up towards your ears. Depression is lowering them back down. Rounding the shoulders is protraction. Pulling them back is retraction. And I'm not able to show you upward and downward rotation because you wouldn't be able to see it through the back of my shirt. So here we are at daily maintenance for the shoulder joint. Again, I'm going to insert a little video here so you can see all the movements, but you can expect to see some more CARs. So in your daily maintenance toolbox, we've got several different variations of shoulder and scapula CARs. So you can see I'm getting into my strong starting position here. And to start with, we'll do a standing shoulder CAR. So I flex my shoulder all the way up, keeping my ribs locked down. So we're isolating that movement at the shoulder, rotating as I bring my arm back. So you can see that my thumb is starting to move down towards the floor, but it tries to continue all the way around until it's pointing back up towards the ceiling. Once I've reached this position, I push back into extension, gradually start to rotate back in and around as my arm reaches that overhead position, again keeping that strong and stable overhead position as I gently bring my arm back down to my side. So that first and last movement, that flexion and the extension back to the starting position, those are going to be your easiest. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging to add irradiation to this part of the movement, But don't forget about those parts. They're still just as important. They still need to be cared for and they still need to be strengthened. So you're just trying to scrape out as much range of motion through that movement as you can. Next, we're moving into a side lying car. So exactly the same movement, but now we're playing with gravity a little bit differently. It's the exact same thing. You're flexing your arm up, bringing it all the way back and around, returning to that start position. You'll do that in both directions, but try this different setup. You might find it more challenging. You might find it less challenging. If you had any pinching with the standing, that may be gone in this position. So just try them out and see which one suits your body best. Another variation here, we're in quadruped, tabletop, hands and knees position, whatever you'd like to call it. And you'll be able to see how the difference in the position affects my ability to complete the movement. So my arm isn't getting up quite as high into flexion as I would like. So you can see that just because maybe one position is too easy or you find one causes you pain, it doesn't mean that you can't find one that is challenging or that you don't need to work on. And it's for this reason that I recommend that when you're trying these out, that you actually video yourself. That way you can see your progress over time and see how these different positions affect your own body. Moving on to your scapula cars. For this first standing version, you're going to glue your hands to the sides of your legs. They can move up or down, but they can't move forward or backward. This one's going to look more like a box than a circle because you round your shoulders forward, lift them up, keep them up as high as you can as you pull them back, and then push them down. Keeping them down as much as possible, you're going to round them forward. And essentially, you're just trying to stay at the end range of each of these movements. And once you've done that twice in one direction, you'll reverse that and do 2 boxes in the opposite direction. And really trying to be cognizant of those hands not moving. We're trying to only move through the shoulder blades. Trying to scrape out as much range of motion as possible. Some people, you might like a little bit more tactile feedback. So by leaning into the wall, you can feel the movement in a different way. You're still going to start by lowering down into those shoulders, lift them up, and then push the wall away by rounding your shoulders. You can see that this movement isn't coming from my elbows. That's why we're in this nice close-up position so that you can see that all that movement is just coming from my shoulder blades. 2 boxes in one direction, 2 boxes in the other direction. Another variation for the scapula here on hands and knees. It's similar to the wall in that it just gives you a little bit more feedback. You can feel the movement in a different way. You're still lowering the shoulder blades down, sinking down into them, not bending at the elbows, lifting them up to the ears, then pushing the floor away. And again, you're starting with a minimum of 2 boxes in each direction, trying to get as much movement out of those shoulder blades as possible. At first, it might not be very much, and that's totally okay. And again, just a quick recap. We're talking about level 1 cars for the shoulder and for the shoulder blades, which are the scapula. Essentially, you're doing 2 times in each direction per side, multiple times a day if you can, but at the very least once a day. I showed you several different variations and setups for each of them. The reason for that is gravity can play such a huge role in how comfortable it is for you, how challenging it is for you. So you really need to play around with each of these and see which one suits you best. If all of them feel great, feel free to play around with them throughout the day. You can do one variation in the morning, one at noon, one at night, so on and so forth. And I'll just leave you with this reminder. I can't say it enough or stress it enough. If you have questions about this, if you want more information, get in touch with your local fitness department. You can ask them questions, they can teach you new exercises and help you adapt anything that I mentioned in here in order to have it better fit your body. So get in touch with them, they're there to help you. Thank you so much for joining me for this neck, spine, and shoulder workshop. I hope you learned a lot and have a great day.